everybody, welcome into the Unstable Internet Week 12 and a half Waiver Wire live stream. It's me, Dan Harris. It's Kyle Yates. We're here every week. It's a weird week. If I freeze, I'm sorry. Yates will take over. Yates, what's up? How you doing?
Doing all right, man. We were talking about it on the podcast that we recorded earlier today, that this is just a super weird week as far as like trying to figure out your process and like going through. At this point, like I know what I need to have done throughout the week. I know by Monday I have to have this many games written up in my article, and all that. I can't do anything. Because I don't have the stats from everything. It's a mess, and we'll get through it together.
Kudos to the NFL for figuring it a way to not cancel games. Wednesday football is a new one for me. I don't know how to process it. And really, waiver wire is weird right now because we don't actually know what's going to happen in Wednesday's game. But whatever. It's crazy. It's 2020. So let's get into it. Let's talk about our waiver wire pickups now. Tags and I were not entirely on the same page. Yeah, on our waiver wire show, Yates, which you were not on, which makes me sad. But I would like to hear your waiver wire pickup. Start with your number one overall. Hit me up.
As of right now, with the just unknowns with Josh Jacobs' injury, it sounds like he's maybe going to be back for this week. I don't really have any specific clarity on that yet. So as of right now, it's Devontae Booker. It's kind of a 1A, 1B situation here with Devontae Booker, the Las Vegas Raiders running back, and then Alexander Madison, the running back for the Minnesota Vikings. And I can explain my reasoning behind Alexander Madison if you want, but if you want to just focus in on Booker, we can do that too.
You know what, I'm going to turn it to whatever you want to do today.
I'm just going to talk.
Let's start with Booker. And then we can talk about why I'm mad that Alexander Madison is 32% rostered. That makes no sense. Alexander Madison has to be basically rostered everywhere, and it's preposterous at his percentage. But start with Booker, then we can yell about Madison.
Yeah, so with Booker, you're looking at Jalen Rhaegar out last week and maybe even out this week too. So if Josh Jacobs does indeed miss this game, well, then you're looking at a significant opportunity here for Devontae Booker, even though it may be a 1 week rental, maybe something that can get you into the fantasy playoffs. I mean, Devontae Booker is going to see work, and he's produced in his opportunities so far this year. So I think that with Booker, if you add him, if you're in need of a running back this week, let's say that you have Josh Jacobs, and there's the concern there that we might not know by the time that waivers run on Friday morning at this point, that at this point we might not know. So Devontae Booker is absolutely worth adding to give you that insurance.
I kind of think that Booker is probably worth adding regardless. Don't you think so? Because at this point, isn't he sort of in the vein of an Alexander Madison high and handcuff? Maybe not quite to that extent because of the fact that if Jalen Rhaegar is healthy, he factors in a little more. Fine. But Booker has produced. It's a good offensive line when they're healthy. They are able to, have an effective running game every time. They're not scared to give the running backs the ball near the goal line. Don't you think Booker should probably be owned, even if we hear that Jacobs is going to be healthy?
Yeah, I don't think he would land at my number one spot if that's the case.
Correct.
But yet, you're completely right that this is someone who, if you're still holding on to, let's talk about the Monday Night Football game. If you're holding on to Travis Fulgham, Jalen Rhaegar, like Greg Ward for some reason, if you're still holding on to these guys that you're not going to put them anywhere near your starting lineup in the fantasy football playoffs, cut them, drop them. Like, get them off your roster because they're not going to serve any purpose. However, if you can now add these guys of Alexander Madison and Devontae Booker, who are extremely valuable high-end insurance running backs, get them on your roster, because what happens if you're in week 14 and, God forbid, Josh Jacobs goes down with an injury, Dalvin Cook goes down with an injury, which we actually saw happen this past Sunday. So if that's the case, then now you have a starting running back, a very valuable fantasy asset heading into week 15 of your fantasy football playoffs if you do make it.
Yeah, that's really what fantasy managers need to be thinking about at this moment, is who are the guys who are going to make the difference if they do get the opportunity. Taking low-end guys who really have no, chance of actually providing value, which is why it's kind of funny to me that Tags' number one guy this week, I believe, was Frank Gore. Now, we should talk about that a little bit, because Gore did produce in this most recent game. He has no competition for carries in that backfield, and he gets Las Vegas. One of either, I can never remember if Houston or Las Vegas is the lowest in rushing DVOA defensive or second to last, but it's a terrible rush defense. He's going to get carries regardless of game script. Like, Adam Gase don't care. He don't care if he down 28 points. You're going to give this 80-year-old running back 20 carries. So is he a guy who I think what I can say is I have trouble with Gore, because Gore is like, there's no ceiling with Frank Gore, right? No. There's just none. But at the same time, you can probably roll him out there as a high-end flex play this coming week. So where does he fall in your waiver wire rankings?
Yeah, it all depends on what you need. I think, to come to Tags' aid there, it all depends on what you need and what I don't know Tags' reasoning. I haven't had a chance to listen to yesterday's podcast.
It's not very smart or rational. Just don't like most of the things he says.
I would expect nothing less from you guys. So with Frank Gore though, like it all depends on what you need. Do you need a win this week? Then the Alexander Madison pickup might not be for you, right? Like, because at that point, if you need a win to get into the playoffs this week, Dalvin Cook appears to be fine from his injury. Yeah. He appears to be on track to play next week. Like there's no concern there. So picking up Alexander Madison really isn't going to help you. Frank Gore though could get you into the fantasy football playoffs. And I've said this for several weeks now. If you have a chance this year to get into your fantasy football playoffs, do it. Like no, there is absolutely no telling what can happen or predicting, like just get into the playoffs. Anything can happen. So I think that's kind of the situation that you need to be thinking about. If you need the win right now, then Frank Gore is your pickup. I've got him at 3 overall, so he's right in that range, but I would place a higher precedent on Alexander Madison and Devontae Booker.
It's definitely for me a 1A, 1B, 1C, 1D situation. We've talked about 3 of them so far. We haven't talked about the 4th one, but I'm fine with any of these guys. Like I do think that Booker offers a higher ceiling. Jacobs is a tough guy, man. If you have first of all, he's been on the injury report the last couple of weeks. It's like, oh my God, it's a hip or it's a knee. And then he just plays through it and he plays really well. I think he's going to find a way to play in this game because I think he wants to play. At the same time, as bad as the Raiders looked in this last game against Atlanta, they're going to destroy the Jets. They can do it with Devontae Booker. They can do it with you at running back. So they may not feel the need to push Jacob. So I would go with Booker just for the upside. Gore is fine. Madison should be rostered because even though he fell flat in the one game that he got his chance without Dalvin Cook, he's still a guy without question. Although it is worth mentioning with Madison, the schedule is really bad, Yates, for running backs. I mean, we talked about it with Dalvin Cook, right? So it is, I get it. They just lean into the run so much that you still have to. How about the other guy who's on my list here? And that is Cam Akers. He second half of this last game, he took over completely. He had the big run, got the goal line carry. I think he had 1 touch before half, and then the rest of it all came after the half where he pretty much dominated all the touches. We joked about it with Scott Engel on the waiver wire show where he was like, go get him now 2 weeks ago before he explodes. Is he a guy who you think is worth rostering, or do you think that you need at least 1 injury or possibly 2 injuries in that backfield for him to really have significant value?
Yeah, I've got him at number 10 overall in my rankings. So Akers is really not someone that I'm clamoring to go pick up. And for the reason that you mentioned, it really is that you're going to need Darrell Henderson or Malcolm Brown to fade into oblivion for Akers to see the type of workload that he's going to need. I mean, Akers up to this point up to last week's game, had not been particularly efficient on the ground. So if you are adding Cam Akers, and especially if it were earlier on in the season, let's just I would say let's transport back to week 8, but I don't want to go back into 2020 any further than I need to. Yep. But if we were to go back and have this situation where we got this little glimpse of Cam Akers breaking out at week 8, then that would be something where, okay, yeah, invest in Cam Akers because he could turn into a reliable fantasy asset down the road. But we're in week 13, right? You have 1 game before now you're considering playing Cam Akers in your fantasy football playoffs. That's just not a spot that I'm willing to be at. With the way that Sean McVay has operated with this backfield up to this point, I'm perfectly willing to let someone else take the gamble with Cam Akers. And I'm actually if I were facing someone in week 14 in the fantasy football playoffs and they had Cam Akers, I'd actually be kind of excited because there's a possibility that he lets them down.
Yeah, it's a really weird spot, man. It's like Akers might not need the injury necessarily. He might not. It could be, again, Tags loves to talk about how Sean McVay has basically said he wants to be Kyle Shanahan in the sense of how he uses his running backs. But Raheem Mostert, by the end of the season, was a guy that we were rolling out there each and every week last year, not worrying too much about the fact that he likes to rotate backs. So you could see Cam Akers clearly being the most effective back and taking the backfield. I think there's a chance he doesn't need the injuries to really have that value. At the same time, yeah, I'm not going to start him this week, right? Against Arizona. So it's really, really difficult. So again, all four of those guys, I'm fine with any one of them. And it is really what you need. If you are really desperate at running back and you just need that body, or you're really strong elsewhere, right? You have a really, really strong roster going on. You just need some guaranteed points. It's probably Gore is your guy because he is going to get you points against Las Vegas. But I think Booker offers the highest upside. And I do think that Booker is worth rostering, even if he's not going to be the starter this week. Again, Jacobs has been basically injured, fighting through it on and off all season long. So that's fine. Let's stick with running backs here, Yates, instead of going through your top pickups. Any other running backs who you think are even worth picking up this week?
No, not necessarily. I mean, the next guys up on my list are the Atlanta running backs, and they go against the Saints this week, and we don't have any clarity on Todd Gurley just yet. So that's just a situation there. I said on the Sunday morning live stream, I was like, Brian Hill, I ranked Brian Hill at 22 last week, and people were wanting to put him a lot higher than that. People were putting him in the conversation of like, okay, do I start this player or Brian Hill? And I was saying, like, typically just go with the other player, because Brian Hill has not looked efficient up to this point in, of the season. Yes, he has a fantastic matchup on the ground, but it was, okay, do we know that he's going to get Todd Gurley's workload? Or is it going to be a committee? Are we going to see Ito Smith involved? Are we going to see Quadrial? Like, we just had that question, and we ended up seeing Ito Smith heavily involved here. So I think this is just a situation where I'm willing to let someone else deal with it. And especially at this point of the season, I don't want to go anywhere near him.
Yeah. Remember when we had Kate Majuk on with Mike Evans, and she was sort of talking about, she had the really, really hot Mike Evans take, which was like, I don't want any part of him. I don't want to even be forced to have to think about starting him. I'd rather that my opponent blow all of his fab on it. That was a crazy, I mean, that kudos to Kate. I like that she sticks her neck out there. She sticks with her opinion, but that's sort of how I feel about Brian Hill. I don't want to have to make the choice about Brian Hill, about starting him after this one. I would just as soon, like you said, if I see my opponent starting Brian Hill against the Saints, I'm going to feel pretty good about that. With that said, I can't remember the opponents from last year, but Tags and I were joking about it. The game that everybody wanted to start him, I forget if it was against the Panthers or some can't miss team last year when we picked him up to fill in, and he completely laid an egg. And then the next game when nobody was really starting him, he went nuts. So you never know about that, obviously. A guy who I was thinking about was Jordan Wilkins, but we talked about it. If you listened to the podcast yesterday, we were talking about him because we did not realize that Jonathan Taylor had not actually tested positive, was just a close contact. He's already off the COVID list. So no interest in Jordan Wilkins. What about Royce Freeman? Philip Lindsay injured his knee. If Lindsay were out, would you have any interest in Royce Freeman going up against Kansas City, or just, oh my goodness, stay away from everybody on Denver?
That's pretty much it. Was that with Philip Lindsay and Melvin Gordon both in the lineup, we were like, no, stay far away from both of these guys, right? Gordon came out and exploded a couple weeks ago, but yeah, that's just a situation that I want to avoid. Royce Freeman's at the bottom of my list.
Okay. I like it. Let's go to wide receivers then, Yates, because I will say this. The fun part about recording a waiver wire podcast on a Monday when there's a player playing in the Monday night game is that you could be like, here's my caveat. He could move up. He could move down depending on what we see tonight. And we did see some things. And so my number one waiver wire pickup at wide receiver is now my number 6, and just basically ignore him. And that's Jalen Rhaegar. I don't know. How did you feel about Rhaegar before?
He's still your number 1 wide receiver pickup?
No, he's number 6 now. He's number 6.
Oh, got it. Okay.
And to be clear, you can interchange number 6 and number 15, and I
100%,
care
yeah.
at all. But where was Rhaegar before the last night's game, and where is he now?
Rhaegar was my number 5 overall pickup. And that was, I put out the video here on our YouTube channel, at youtube.com/FantasyPros. And I said, like, Rhaegar is at number 5 right now, but he could move up or down based on the, Monday Night Football game. Yeah. Spoiler alert, he moved down. Yes. He's now well outside my top 10. This is just the guy I just mentioned him, like Rhaegar, Fulgham, Greg Ward, Alshon Jeffrey, whatever. Stay far away. Just drop them. They serve no purpose at this point.
All right. So just let me clarify very quickly. He wasn't my number 1 overall. He was my number 1 wide receiver. He was number 5 overall. He is now my number 6 wide receiver, and that puts him at number 19 overall. So not anywhere on the vicinity, 100%. So Rhaegar is out. Who is in as your number 1 wide receiver? Or wait, Rhaegar wasn't your number 1 wide receiver regardless?
He was either 1 or 2.
Okay. So who's 1 now?
So this comes with the disclaimer that I hate this waiver wire week. Okay. So these guys, like I know you're going to ask me like my fab percentage. It's 5% or less.
Okay.
Like it is like it, do not add these guys unless you are absolutely desperate. Kiki QT comes in at number 1 overall with the Will Fuller news. So, I mean, you're looking for options in this offense to throw the ball to. Brandon Cooks, of course, gets a huge bump up, but outside of that, I mean, you're now betting on Isaiah Coulter, 5th round rookie out of Rhode Island, to step up, or I don't even know who else they have on their roster. So it's like Kiki QT. He's shown that he can be effective in the past. He's had an issue staying on the field and being healthy and fumbles, and there's a whole list of concerns there. But yeah, he's my number 1 pickup, but that's legitimately only if I'm absolutely desperate at wide receiver.
Yeah, everything you said, I love, because it's a bad waiver wire week for wide receivers. There's usually always 1 or 2 guys. I'm like, oh, you know, Michael Pittman Jr. was on there. Even Sterling Shepard, Deebo Samuel last week. We were like, okay, we'll get by with this sort of stuff. Not this week, but with that said, QT is also my number 1 wide receiver pickup. And I think part of it too is QT has sort of, at one point, he was kind of this breakout candidate. We don't know necessarily how much of it at this point was the fact that Bill O'Brien clearly didn't like him, right? Bill O'Brien's gone. And again, I've never seen a team go from being where they were at wide receiver week X and then being where they are at week X+1. I mean, Randall Cobb on IR, Will Fuller suspended for 6 games, Kenny Stills. Maybe they'll bring back Kenny Stills at this point. Who knows? But if not, yeah, QT absolutely. Now it's not the greatest schedule: Indianapolis, Chicago, Indianapolis, but still they're going to need points. Indianapolis is going to put up points. They're going to need points. So yeah, he's a guy who I would go out and get. All right, before we get to our next couple of wide receivers, I will remind everybody: look, guys, it's week 12 and a half or wherever we are. A lot of people are, out of football contention. If you are watching this live stream, ask your question. We're going to get to a ton of questions. Ask your question. Okay. Right now, put them in the comments. We're keeping track of them. We will try to get to them. Okay. So you have missed out because your 5% fab bid was not big enough to get Kiki QT. Any other wide receiver who you are looking at this point, adding whatsoever, any appeal of any of them for this week?
Not particularly.
You had such an angry face at that point. It was like, I don't even think I'm going to talk about this right now.
Yeah. I mean, T.Y. Hilton is the next wide receiver on my waiver wire pickup list, and you know how I feel about T.Y. Hilton.
You love T.Y. Hilton, number 1 supporter.
Nope. Right, so yeah, at this point, I mean, we can go through the names, but I mean,
well, let me throw a couple. What about the Jets receivers? And I know we tease about the Jets, as Tags and I did, and everything like that. But you can't. I mean, Mims has 8 targets in 3 straight games. He has been productive pretty much 3 straight games. And the good thing was it wasn't just with Joe Flacco. You saw it with Sam Darnold, Rashad Penny, generally speaking, pretty productive for the last 3 games. They get Las Vegas right now. They're kind of guys who fall behind QT for me, but I think if I'm really in desperate need of a wide receiver right now, I'd feel okay about sticking them in as maybe a flex play or something coming into the week.
Yeah, it's situation dependent, right? It depends on where you're at with your roster. But again, we're talking about heading into week 13, where these are crucial matchups for a lot of people. So to sit there and pick up Denzel Mims or Rashad Penny, I mean, and to play them in week 13, which is going to, for a lot of people, is going to decide your playoff seeding, where if you end up in the playoffs, like it's going to depend, or it's going to determine a lot. So for me, like I'm off. Like, yeah, I think you can pick them up if you're absolutely desperate. But again, all these guys, I mean, Dan, legitimately from 1 to let's go down to 15. Like I've only got 15 players ranked, as a wide receiver. Is like this, all of these guys can be 5% fab bids. Like they're all just kind of thrown into a blender. So it's really just take your pick. But at this point of the season, I can't get excited about recommending Denzel Mims or Rashad Penny, even though they could produce for your lineup. That's just not a guarantee.
Yeah, well, that is all true. I will say for me that I view QT and I view Mims and I view Penny as guys who it's week 13, and the whole sort of concept of, man, I'm risking my entire playoff life to try to get into the playoffs on these guys is just abhorrent to everything we are as fantasy analysts. With that said, there's a decent chance that these guys are going to be your best starting options this week. So I'm more okay with picking them up, and I do have them a little bit ahead. But again, we're talking about 5% bids, as you mentioned. I do have them a little bit ahead of this just conglomerate of wide receivers that I really have no interest in picking up. So let me throw out a couple of other names. You mentioned Hilton. Gabriel Davis, who had a pretty nice game, even though he caught a touchdown pass from Cole Beasley, but he was on the field for the entirety of the snaps without John Brown, and Brown is on IR. You've got Rhaegar, who, again, was one of the more productive Eagles wide receivers last night with double-digit yards. Henry Ruggs, who finally got involved a little bit and has the Jets. Still got Josh Reynolds. You've got the Jacksonville wide receivers, really all three of them. So anybody else who you're even like, okay, gosh, if you're absolutely desperate, maybe I'd think about this person.
Yeah, Ruggs is at 3, and it's a talent break there for me, right? Like the talent level of Henry Ruggs, he was my number 2 wide receiver coming out. So with Henry Ruggs, I think that, and you saw him get a couple of deep targets last week, and like you said, they started to get him involved. And so I think you can roll in Henry Ruggs, especially in this matchup against the Jets. Hunter Renfrow is also in that conversation, right? As far as someone who you can plug in. Gabriel Davis is at number 4 for me. So yeah, I totally agree that if you're looking for just the opportunity, I think Gabriel Davis probably has the best bet to, as far as his role in his offense to contribute. So with John Brown on IR.
Yeah, he's number 4 for me as well. They do get San Francisco right now. But again, I do think that offense is a little bit immune to sort of the normal way we do it, just because of the way Josh Allen runs it. And he's always a threat to run, that I think it opens up more lanes than you otherwise would see. Okay, so we are not excited about this waiver wire week. How about quarterbacks here? Anybody who's kind of widely available, who, if you're struggling at the position, you're thinking about picking up?
Yeah, there's actually a couple. So Ryan Fitzpatrick, if we're assuming that Tua Tagovailoa is out for this game again, which the report that I saw last week was that he's expected to miss some time with that thumb injury that he suffered in practice last week. So Ryan Fitzpatrick up against the Cincinnati Bengals, yeah, sign me up. Like Devontae Parker, sign me up. I just think that Fitzpatrick, he'll probably end up as a top 12 quarterback in my rankings this week. And then Phillip Rivers. Phillip Rivers has now finished as the QB 13, QB 10, and yes, we have the Baltimore-Pittsburgh game left to determine, but as the QB 10 again this week. So 3 back-to-back-to-back performances here of really solid fantasy numbers. Now, I went back and looked at, because Pittman saw 9 targets last week, only reeled in 2 of them. Yeah. I was like, what the heck happened here? So I went back and looked at Game Pass and was looking at his targets and breaking them down. And Phillip Rivers couldn't hit the broadside of a barn. Like it was so bad. And so there's the concern there that you're firing up Phillip Rivers and with all the issues that he has, but yet he's produced, and it's a fantastic matchup against the Houston Texans. So I think you can get away with starting Phillip Rivers if you do miss out on Ryan Fitzpatrick.
And the other thing to point out is, again, we talk about it mostly in the context of the running backs, but if you are really desperate at quarterback, and there are a lot of leagues, I don't know about you, Yates, I felt like I noticed it more this year, where managers were rostering 2 quarterbacks and just kind of playing the matchups, which we have a tool for that, by the way, which you can use. You can find the right 2 to pair together. But there are a lot where the pickings are slim out on the waiver wire. Phillip Rivers gets Houston, Las Vegas, and Houston in the next 3 matchups. Like, he could be a guy, if you're in a pinch, that you could actually ride there. With that said, the fact that you were like, man, I can't stake my almost playoff life on Denzel Mims or Rashad Penny, but maybe Phillip Rivers, if I absolutely have to, is really where we've come. Yates recommending Phillip Rivers and T.Y. Hilton, everyone. This is where we've gone. So fantastic there. But those are the 2 guys. Fitzpatrick.
The other,
for sure. Yeah, go ahead.
I don't know. I don't think he was added to our list here, Dan, but I just thought of him. We talked about him on the podcast earlier. I doubt his ownership percentage is high enough to reach our threshold here. Mitchell Trubisky has to be widely available.
Yeah. It's certainly not the ownership, the roster percentage. Yeah, no, I think it was, it's Mitchell Trubisky. But make your case, Yates, because we talked about it on the podcast, and you did, when I thought about it more, because when you first mentioned it, I was like, you shut your mouth. I don't want to talk about that whatsoever. But you made his schedule. I hadn't even looked at it because Mitchell Trubisky never came to mind as a potential option. But talk about it a little bit, because I think it's a fair point.
Yeah. So Mitchell Trubisky, obviously, for everything that he does, for every lack of progression that he has shown up to this point of his career, right, where you're saying you're in year 4, dude, like you should be so much better than this. For every boneheaded interception that he throws, He finished as the QB6 last week. And you look at his, again, well, that number may shift with the Baltimore-Pittsburgh game. But
Yes.
anyway, so you look at his matchups, his upcoming matchups, and it's not just this week as a streamer, but moving into the fantasy football playoffs, Detroit, Houston, Minnesota, and Jacksonville for weeks 13, 14, 15, and 16. So like Mitchell Trubisky could actually end up being someone that you roll out there. I mean, for as gross as it's going to be, that schedule is extremely enticing. And I brought this up on the podcast because I knew that I was just going to get destroyed when I mentioned Mitchell Trubisky in this segment. But talking about like in 2017 through weeks 14 through 16, this player was the QB1 in all of fantasy football, and he won several fantasy championships for people. And that quarterback was Blake Bortles. And so for everything that we can sit here and say, like Mitchell Trubisky is a terrible NFL quarterback and, and nitpick his game and everything like that, he can be a useful fantasy asset, especially if they are going to be playing from behind or whatever. So I think this could be someone that you should look at from a fantasy perspective if you're looking to stream the position and moving forward.
This live stream is going to go down in Fantasy Pros lore as being like, remember that live stream where Dan and Yates recommended Phillip Rivers and Mitchell Trubisky and T.Y. Hilton? It's going to be amazing. Tight end, since we're talking about players that you don't really want to be starting, but maybe you would take a look at any widely available tight end this week that you're like, oh, all right, I'll reluctantly roll with this person.
Yeah. Shoot me now. Trey Burton.
Oh my God, it's an all Colts.
It's an all Colts. Okay. Yeah. So Trey Burton, 6 targets last week. I was able to find the end zone. You saw Mo Alley Cox get 2 targets and Jack Doyle get 1. So I think moving forward, especially with the matchup against Houston, that this is a guy that you can roll in. As I just finished writing up this game, saying that I'm probably going to be ranking Trey Burton as a high-end tight end 2 this week with upside due to the matchup. So I think you can get away with starting Trey Burton. But again, I have to go cleanse my mouth with something because I've recommended 3 Colts players.
This is really terrible. Yeah, I mean, Burton's fine. He's just in the mix for me. Again, he just saw fewer snaps than Mo Alley Cox. I don't know if that was just about the game script and the way it sort of all worked out. But for me, yeah, I don't know. I mean, Kyle Rudolph is somebody who's interesting if Irv Smith is out again. And if Adam Thielen is out again, then for sure against Jacksonville, he'd be right there. So certainly monitor the progress of that. But if they're both in, I don't really want to go near him. I love me some Logan Thomas, but Pittsburgh is really tough against opposing tight ends. So it's not where you really want to go. Dalton Schultz, maybe, but again, against Baltimore. And then Jordan Reed, not a great game against Buffalo. You can kind of do some stuff, but yeah, it's just kind of slim picking. So, all right, why don't we run through then our top guys in order so you can just, I realize that it's not the most exciting waiver week, but we'll get some questions. So why don't you just give me your top, I don't know, go through your top 10, I guess, or top 5 or whatever you want to do.
Yeah, Devontae Booker, Alexander Madison, Frank Gore, Kiki QT, T.Y. Hilton, Trey Burton, Logan Thomas, Ryan Fitzpatrick, Phillip Rivers, and Cam Akers.
Okay, I will go with Booker, Akers, Madison, Gore, with them all being basically tied. I have a little more faith in Akers than you do. QT 5, Mims and Perriman 6 and 7, Ryan Fitzpatrick 8, and then for the tight ends, it's Dalton Schultz and Kyle Rudolph, but I really don't care. That's where we are. We hit 9 and 10 in the waiver wire rankings this week, and I'm like, oh goodness, I don't want to go anywhere near them whatsoever. So, okay, are you ready to get some questions?
Yeah.
Wonderful. All right, let's get into it. From Stephen Cooper, have you heard anything? This is actually good. Thank you asking, Stephen Cooper, because I want to ask this as well. Have you heard anything about David Johnson and whether or not he is coming back off IR?
I legitimately have not heard anything up to this point. So,
word.
I mean, I heard that he went on IR, and that was the last thing I heard. So yeah. I'll do some digging later on today, but man, I have not heard anything.
No, I haven't heard anything either. And it's weird. Right now I'm planning on, I'm going to rank Duke as the starter for this week. And again, it's not that pretty in terms of matchup, but yeah, I agree. This is, we're getting this one a lot. Yates. It's basically about Latavius Murray and Alvin Kamara. So they basically want to know, how do you value these two guys until Drew Brees comes back?
Yeah. So with Taysom Hill at quarterback, I think that you're going to see some running lanes open up for Latavius Murray as the runner in between the tackles. And then obviously with Alvin Kamara getting essentially 0 targets, like that obviously downgrades him. So I think looking at the situation, Alvin Kamara is no longer a top 3 option. until we get Drew Brees back. He is now a low end running back 1 for me, just due to like he's going to see work on the ground. Like he's going to get some work where he's not going to completely ghost your lineup, but yet the majority of his value has come through his work in the receiving game. So until we get that back, we can't trust him as a top tier option. So he's a low end running back 1. Latavius Murray is someone who I'm considering as a high end running back 3, probably in that same territory of a Frank Gore, where you know that he's going to get work. In this past week, like I don't want to read into too much the fact that he scored multiple times, because Denver wasn't competing in that game. They had no chance, right? So I think that's something that I don't want to read too much into that. He's going to be a high-end running back 3. If he does it again this week, then okay, I might move him up just a little bit, but he's just one of those guys that you can plug in.
Yeah, I do think that he's gone from being a guy who I really don't want any part of to a guy who you can plug in every week as more of a flex play. And I agree with you. Kamara is still a guy you're starting every single week, but there's now no real reason to expect him to get any targets, which really cuts into his value. With that said, you're starting Alvin Kamara if you roster him, because the potential is way too high. From Gabe Smith, what are your thoughts on Dalvin Cook's playoff schedule? We touched on it earlier, Yates, after this week against Jacksonville, which, by the way, it's not even the greatest matchup for opposing running backs. I mean, they can be exploited, but they're much easier to exploit through the air. They get the Bucks, the Bears, and the Saints. That's a really bad playoff schedule. What are your thoughts just generally on it?
Yeah, it's really tough, but yet at the same time, you're still starting Dalvin Cook. You saw Dalvin Cook a couple of weeks ago against the Bears. Saw 33 carries off the top of my head. Like they're going to do everything they can to funnel the ball Dalvin Cook's way. And he has the athleticism to break off one big play and, save his fantasy day. So I think that, yeah, you can't expect the type of production that you're going to expect from Derrick Henry with his playoff schedule. But yet at the same time, Dalvin Cook is still a top 5 option based on the position.
Yeah, that's the thing. People, in my opinion, react way too much to matchups. I get this week, it kind of played into it a little bit more. But for me, what do you want to do at this point?
Right.
Like, would I trade Dalvin Cook for Derrick Henry? Yeah, sure. But I'd probably do that regardless at this point. So yeah, not much you can do. And I'm not ever going to think twice about rolling him out there or anything like that. Brad Whitaker asks, what are your thoughts on Wayne Gallman?
So Wayne Gallman, I think, moving forward, he's a matchup dependent, low end running back too, where this past week against Cincinnati, we saw that coming and we said, okay, we can rank him as a mid-range running back too with upside. Moving forward with Colt McCoy at QB, assuming that Daniel Jones is indeed out for this game, then that's, it's a downgrade, but he's still going to see enough volume to return, again, that kind of area of like Frank Gore, where you're going to get the volume. Now, long-term, once Devontae Freeman comes back, I think that's a situation where you're going to see this turn into more of a committee. I think Wayne Gallman has played his way into, seeing some carries when Devontae Freeman comes back. So it's just going to be one of those situations too in a low-scoring offense where they're just going to cancel each other out. So Gallman, moving forward, not super excited about him.
They do have Seattle this week. That's not a great matchup, but we saw him succeed in other tough matchups, right? Against the Bucks, against Washington, against Philadelphia. You roll him out there when he's there. And I'm not too worried about when Devonta Freeman comes back. The signing of Devonta Freeman was dumb anyway, although they're in first place. So yay, you go for whatever you want to go for at that point. But I think Gallman has certainly earned the role. I think you're going to be able to roll him out there pretty much each and every week. From Jordan Duggar, is Zeke worth keeping at this point?
Yes, he's worth keeping. You don't drop Ezekiel Elliott, the running back that's a running back like him who's guaranteed that amount of volume. Yeah, tough schedule, this week against Baltimore. That's not a situation where you're looking to start him.
Might be, by the way. Let's point this out at least a little bit, right?
Right.
Because if they don't have Brandon Williams, first of all, they're going to be, who the heck knows what's going on with that team? Brandon Williams and Calais Campbell, they've got. If those guys are out, their run defense is exploitable for sure. So it might not be a bad. If they're in, it's a really tough run defense. But sorry, just wanted to point that out. Go ahead.
Yeah, no, when you interjected, I thought you were talking about the fact of like this game might not even happen. Which
Right,
I was like, oh yeah, that's very fair. No, with that's a good point with Brandon Williams and Calais Campbell. But still, at the same time, this isn't an offense that's going to really succeed with their offensive line, right? Even if Williams and Campbell are out, they're just going to get destroyed up front.
Yeah.
So. Yeah, Zeke, you can't drop him heading into the fantasy football playoffs. He's one of those guys that you hold on to for depth. But if you've got other options that you can play above him, then you absolutely do that. I got a question on Reddit earlier today that was like, would you still play Gibson and James Robinson over Ezekiel Elliott moving forward? And I was like, yeah. I would. You know, like you start those guys over Ezekiel Elliott at this point, but yeah, you don't drop Zeke.
Right. Zeke is out of the, oh yeah, I'm definitely going to start him each and every week, but he is a guy who on the vast majority of fantasy rosters is going to be rolled out there as an RB2 just from pure volume alone. So definitely keep him and almost certainly start him, but there are a lot of better options out there for sure. From AK, thoughts on Joe Mixon after he returns from injured reserve?
Yes, so it's an interesting situation because with Joe Mixon coming back, the timing, right? If he was coming back this week, then it would be okay, I can sit him a week and I can wait and see. But now with him, he's supposed to come back week 14, I think, is when his eligibility to come off of IR is. So that's a situation where you're going to have to make that decision. You're going to have to decide, do I put Joe Mixon in my lineup, assuming that he comes off of IR? That's not a guarantee at this point. Anything with Joe Mixon's injury is not a guarantee. So the timing is super weird. And I think that personally, I want to wait a week before I plug in Joe Mixon into my starting lineup. So I've got Mixon everywhere in Dynasty. And it's a situation where I am probably going to wait to plug him into my lineup, even though the options that I may have behind him don't have the ceiling or potential that he does. But I want to wait a week and see, because this is a situation where he could come out and he gets re-injured. He came back too early. We don't even know what this injury is. Like you just don't know. So the timing of it is super weird. I would love to wait a week before I completely plug him back into my lineup and have faith.
If I roster Joe Mixon, I am not planning to be able to start him at all for the remainder of the season. As you said, we do not even know that he's going to come back. Just because he goes on IR doesn't mean that, great, after 3 weeks, we know he's going to be back. This was a foot sprain that they thought he was going to be able to play that next week, and it was 5 weeks later, and they put him on IR. We don't really know. Plus, he's got the contract. There's no reason for them to risk him in a
losing season.
Right. With, by the way, a completely backup quarterback where their offensive line is terrible. The matchups aren't great. They got Pittsburgh in week 15. They do have Houston in week 16. You want to hold them for then, great. But I would not be relying on Joe Mixon whatsoever, or thinking, at least at this point, that I'm going to be able to rely on him. From David Gallagher, is Miles Sanders still a top running back, or would you prefer David Montgomery?
With the schedule, I'd probably prefer David Montgomery. Offense, say what you will about the Bears offense, but David Montgomery got looks out of the backfield as a receiver last week. The Bears offense, actually, I'm a Bears fan. Yes, losing to the Packers on primetime TV was terrible. I'm thrilled that we put up 25 freaking points. I'm so happy with that right now. So I think, man, just the opportunity here with David Montgomery, and the matchups here. I talked about it: Detroit, Minnesota, Jacksonville, Houston. Fire up David Montgomery.
May everyone in the world be as optimistic in life as Yates is when he thinks about the Bears, because he always finds the bright side, and I love it for sure. Look, Miles Sanders, he gets Green Bay this week. Okay, and after watching
very fair
Carson Wentz try to throw the ball this past week, I have a feeling they're going to rely on the run defense the run offense pretty heavily. They do get the Saints, though, after that, in the week that Chicago gets Houston. I could certainly see ranking Dave Montgomery above him in that scenario. I also don't want to overreact to a weird game where they came out and they just said it was a tough matchup, and they said, we're just going to throw the ball nonstop, which is just a dumb I get the matchup, but if you're coming in there being like, you know what we're going to do? We're going to let Carson Wentz take.
We're going to lean on Carson Wentz. It'll work
negative.
out.
So, I mean, really, it's not as much as it might look like an unfair question to be like Dave Montgomery over Miles Sanders. That's crazy. I do think that there is probably going to be a week where I'm going to rank, assuming they're both healthy, Dave Montgomery over Miles Sanders at some point. But still, if you're saying pick one for rest of season, I will take Miles Sanders. Daniel S., are there any DST pickups that you would like to do in preparation for your fantasy playoffs? So Yates, we talked about this earlier on the podcast. I think you mentioned the Chargers as one that you might be looking at that might be available.
Yeah, Garrett, our guest on the podcast, brought up the Chargers, and that was the name that I had brought up too. You're looking at their upcoming schedule, and it can be the issue here is that you've got fantasy managers that have been so forward thinking. I've been getting defense questions for the playoffs for the past 4 weeks now, and it's like, how do you even know that you're going to make the playoffs? Like, congratulations, all my redraft teams suck. So then, secondly, it's like, I don't know how you have the space on your bench to be able to afford that. So now you're looking at the waiver wire for picking up these secondary defense options, and it's just not looking pretty. There's not a ton there. So the Chargers were really the only name that I could come up with. outside of that, it's not really looking good. You're going to have to wait for something else to happen where like the Giants offense, right? Like that was a matchup that you could look ahead and say, okay, well, yeah, I think I can plug in this defense against them. Now with Colt McCoy at quarterback, yeah, then that's the situation. Yeah, you plug them in. Joe Burrow in Cincinnati, you weren't going to be clamoring to play the defense playing against Joe Burrow. With Brandon Allen now, you're like, okay, yeah, I can play this defense. So I don't want to go super crazy, but at the same time, I think the Chargers are the answer there.
Yeah, there are a limited number of offenses where you can say, I know for sure that I'm going to feel comfortable playing the defense against. Now, if you need a defense this week and next week, you do have Seattle, which I mentioned on the podcast, who plays the Giants this week, and then the Jets the following week. Washington and the Rams after that. Cleveland, if you are definitely in the playoffs, if you have a bye in the playoffs, they get the Giants and the Jets in weeks 15 and 16. It's pretty difficult to see those being tough matchups for an opposing DST. So really, that's all I can think about, but it's not that exciting, and it's not something I try to do too far in advance. I try to do it 1 week in advance. That's what I usually look at. From Devin Malla, would you drop Tyler Boyd to pick up Deebo Samuel in full PPR?
Yes, I would.
So would I. I think that what we saw to Deebo Samuel was great. The fact that we saw with Mullins. And again, I don't know, man. I'm willing at this point to just kind of rid myself a little bit. I know T. Higgins wound up with the touchdown in that game, but I'm willing to rid myself a little bit of this entire Bengals offense. From Sinful Sounds, is Jordan Akins going to get more attention now with Will Fuller out for the season?
We talked about him on the podcast earlier, saying that he's someone that you can absolutely look at, but he does receive a bump up, but yet at the same time, it's not a significant bump, right? He's not moving from like 18 in my rest of season tight end rankings to 12 or 11. You know, he might move up to 15. So he's still in that streaming tight end conversation, probably with someone like Trey Burton in that territory, but he has the talent to be able to succeed. It's just a matter of, is he actually going to see the targets?
Yeah. From Quarter Boy, what are we thinking about Chris Carson after he was outsnapped so heavily last night by Carlos Hyde?
Yeah, another situation that we talked about on the podcast earlier, saying like with Chris Carson, that could be due to him coming back off his injury that he missed several weeks. Like they just wanted to ease him into the offense. With the way Carson Wentz was playing, they felt, hey, we don't need to push Chris Carson because we're going to win this game, right? We see the box score. We see 23-17, right? That was 23-17. Yep. Yeah, that looks like a close game. No, it wasn't a close game whatsoever. So, that could be something where they just said, hey, let's continue to ride Carlos Hyde. We know that we're going to try to make a deep playoff push here. Let's try to just get the backup running back run. Yep. And he's been performing well. So I'm concerned though. I brought up Rashad Penny. Rashad Penny's supposed to be returning to practice this week. Now, I don't think that this is something where we can necessarily sit here and say, yeah, I'm super excited for Rashad Penny from a fantasy standpoint to come back this year because he's going to light it up. No, but it's going to be something where he's going to take away a little bit of work here from Chris Carson, assuming that he's fully healthy. So it's a situation worth monitoring. I think that Chris Carson is still a fine mid-range running back to roll out every single week. But as far as him being a top 5 option, like what he was earlier on this season, that's just not the case anymore.
Yeah, I pretty much agree with most of that, other than I'm not that concerned about Penny or anything like that. I don't think you are either, but I just, I know he's a name that's on his way back. But realistically, I do think that they want to lean into the run pretty heavily now. I think let Russ cook is not quite as big of a thing as it was in the beginning of the season. So I think they're going to lean into the run. So as much as I think Carlos Hyde can factor in there more, I still think Carson is easily going to provide solid RB2 value going forward. With that said, I do think that Hyde's presence, if Penny comes back fine, that does cut into his ceiling a little bit, but I'm not all that concerned about it. All right, if you could only roster one handcuff, Fabian K asks, which one is the best one in half PPR? Benny Snell, Devontae Booker, or Tony Pollard?
It's not Pollard.
Yeah.
So I'm trying to think of the schedules off the top of my head.
You want me to give them to you?
Yeah, if you wouldn't mind.
Sure. Well, Pittsburgh, as you know, gets Baltimore at some point. But after that game, Washington, Buffalo, Cincinnati, and Indianapolis. For the Raiders, they get the Jets, Indianapolis, the Chargers, and Miami.
It's not like either one of them is like super favorable. That Buffalo Bengals stack there is at weeks 14 and 15
for
the Steelers.
For the Steelers, yeah, they get 14 Buffalo, 15 Cincinnati.
Yeah, that's super enticing. So I think if I'm only choosing one, I'd probably go Benny Snell.
Yeah, I think so too. And I mentioned this also on the podcast. We do have to be, upfront about the fact that James Conner is on the COVID list. We think he did test positive, is what I think you said, Yates. But
I'll look into that again.
Yeah, I was wrong. I don't know if they released that information necessarily. Sometimes they just put on the COVID list, which could be a close contact, just like Jonathan Taylor was. If he did test positive, we have to at least point out the fact that James Conner is a cancer survivor. That does mean that there is, they want to be as careful as possible with him. It is possible that he'll miss some time. I'm not saying that he will, but certainly that is a factor in, and that kind of breaks the tie with me. I do expect Jacobs to play this week, as much as I think you should pick up Devontae Booker just in case. I do expect him to power through this. So I think I would go with Snell, but it's close with Booker for me. From Steve K, is Brandon Cooks a wide receiver 2 now?
Higher than that. I've got him at 11 in my rest of the season rankings. So he's someone that just based on, it's tough matchups. Totally get that. But yeah, based on what this offense is going to have to do, they're playing some tough opponents here. Their defense is not good. And so they're going to have to throw the ball. And I think that Cooks could be looking at 10 plus targets every single week.
Yeah, he was a wide receiver 2 before the Will Fuller injury, in my opinion. So he's, I don't know whether or not he technically makes it into the wide receiver 1 category at this point, but he's right there. So yeah, he's a strong option each and every week. From Andrew S, is Mark Ingram done?
Oh yeah.
Yeah, you can rewind this about, 8 weeks, and the answer would still be yes. From Nicholas Rogers, I have to drop one player: Latavius Murray, Gio Bernard, or Jordan Wilkins.
Giovanni Bernard. Hold on. I'm sorry. Or Jordan Wilkins?
Yes.
Yeah, drop Jordan Wilkins. I stopped listening after Giovanni Bernard.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think it's Wilkins. I think it's a great matchup, but you do need Taylor to be injured for this to have any chance at value for Wilkins, and he's come back this week. So I'm willing to part with Wilkins. From Max Abraham. Now, I know we haven't done our rankings this week. Of course, this week isn't even over, but we can talk about this because I know people love Fitzmagic. Okay, they're very excited about him, and they get Cincinnati, I believe, this week, yep, right, for their matchup. Okay. He wants to know, with the playoffs on the line, this is from, let me get his name, from Max Abraham. Yes, with playoffs on the line, would you rather start Ryan Fitzpatrick against Cincinnati or Justin Herbert against New England?
Herbert.
You have to. I get it. And that's really where I want to go. People are very excited about Fitzmagic. He didn't even have that great a game, by the way, against the Jets. So just bear that in mind.
Right.
But yeah, it's always Herbert. That's not one where you really want to go with. From Brooks, would you pick up Corey Davis or J.K. Dobbins in a half PPR league?
It depends on what I need. Do I need running back depth? Then you go with the running back. Do I need wide receiver depth? Then you go with Corey Davis. I think Corey Davis can provide you some flex upside each week. So you can confidently roll out Corey Davis. Each week. J.K. Dobbins, you can't do that as long as Mark Ingram and Gus Edwards are both healthy.
I don't know if that's true. You might not be able to.
I forgot about that feels like that was 20 weeks ago.
Correct.
I forgot that J.K. Dobbins had taken over this.
Remember how excited we were? And then he immediately hit the COVID list and we were like, oh, darn. Oh, well, there it is.
I completely forgot about that.
Yeah, I think that he might be somebody who you can roll out there. In a vacuum, if we're talking about a flex play, I will roll the dice with Dobbins because I almost always prefer the running back. But I do want to throw some love out there for Corey Davis, who just does produce every game except that one game, I think, against the Bears. You can roll him out there. But I would go with Dobbins for the upside personally. From Simplistic Grace, is Ayuk worth a pickup considering that Deebo Samuel is back?
So Ayuk coming off the COVID list. It depends on who you would have to drop. Right. Ayuk is not someone who I'm sitting here pounding the table saying that he's going to be a consistent wide receiver 3 down the stretch. Right. So I think if that's the case, then it depends on, again, who you're going to have to drop to pick him up. I don't know if you're ever going to feel confident plugging him into your lineup, but he's worth at least picking up if you have the space to see what happens. Mm-hmm. But as far as him, me projecting forward and saying, yeah, you got to go pick up Brandon Ayuk because he's going to be a contributor in the fantasy playoffs, I'm not there.
From Drew, if Gurley is out again or even long-term for the rest of the season, which Atlanta running back do you expect to have more value, Brian Hill or Ito Smith?
I'd still go with Brian Hill, but it's not by much. That's probably like a 53-47 split for me.
Yeah, I agree that it is closer than I would like, which is why I really don't want to roster either one of them.
Right.
From Daniel Oyola in a 10-team PPR league, would you pick up Jacoby Myers or Deebo Samuel?
Deebo Samuel.
That is the correct answer. From Christopher A, I just, I want to give these guys who are dying for Wednesday night and they need performances, they just want us to tell them that everything's going to be all right. I don't know if it will in this one, Yates, but Christopher A needs 10 points to win. Let's give him a half PPR league. Gus Edwards is his only player left. Do you think he's going to win?
No, because J.K. Dobbins and Mark Ingram are eligible to play in this game, and they're going to be flying out, but they can't travel with the team today.
Right.
This is super weird. So they can't, due to the 10-day isolation, they can't travel with the team today as they, I think they're departing to Pittsburgh. However, they can fly out tomorrow on game day, and they're eligible to play.
Yeah. Weird. I agree. Unfortunately.
Now here's the glimmer of hope for you is that with both of them flying out on game day, okay, do they actually get any run? Because they haven't practiced for 10 days. So there's the glimmer of hope. But with all three of these guys, we've said it, like with all three of these guys active and healthy, it's just not exciting.
I will say that if I had all three, I probably would start Edwards even if they're all active, just because I would think that they've probably game planned around the fact, even though they haven't really been able to practice, that Edwards going to be there. But yeah, I don't know. If they get to the goal line, I'm sure they would much rather have Edwards try to run it in than to give RG3 the chance to throw it. So maybe, but probably. Pelia, is it time to drop Savan Ahmed?
Again, it all depends on for who. Myles Gaskin apparently going to be coming back for this game. Not a guarantee at this point yet. So I think if Gaskin, remember this, like, was it 2 weeks ago? Again, concept of time is all completely gone. But 2 weeks ago, Brian Flores saying, like, I don't have a timetable on Myles Gaskin's return. So even though he looked close to returning for this game last week, it's not a guarantee that he's going to be back in week 13. So I think with Ahmed, he's still worth holding on to because he's probably, if he's healthy, then he's probably going to be the main ball carrier here. But so I think it depends on for who. Depends on for who you would have to drop him for. But, I would still be looking to hold on to Ahmed.
Yeah, I think probably your best case scenario is that Ahmed has one more week of value. With that said, 1 week of value for running back is valuable. So I would hold him for now and try to see what the practice reports indicate. From Cornon Jacob, would you replace Will Fuller with Mooney or Gallup?
Mooney. I don't want to go anywhere near Gallup. Now, to be fair, I don't want to go anywhere near Mooney, but yeah, you're looking at the schedule and just hoping that he can become more involved in the offense.
Yeah, Gallup was a little more involved in this last game than I thought, but I agree. I would go with Mooney. From Greg Holmes, is Taysom Hill ever going to become a reliable QB starter for fantasy?
It all depends on what the heck the Saints do next year. I think that you're going to see Brees come back at some point this year. Like, that can't be the last time that we see Drew Brees on the field. He has to go out on his terms. So I think next year it's the question, okay, do they want to build their team this way? Being a running attack and having Taysom Hill throw the ball 16 times a game, but yet run it in multiple times. Like, what do they want their offensive identity to be? So if they feel comfortable leaning into that, then yeah, I think Taysom Hill will be, due to his rushing upside. Yeah, absolutely. He'll be someone that will rank as a top 10 option next year if he is the starter. But as far as, short term, yeah, you still roll him into your lineup, but Brees is going to come back this year, I think.
Yeah, I think so too. From Mateo Lombardo, if I don't need a running back, but I roster Jacobs, should I pick up Devontae Booker to handcuff him?
Yeah, we talked about that earlier, that if you, again, it all depends on who you would have to drop. But yeah, this is the time where you start to move on from the players that that you're not going to be playing in the fantasy playoffs, and you start to, protect yourself, right? You protect your lineup, you swing for the fences heading into the fantasy playoffs. So yeah, I would definitely be looking to add Booker.
From Justin Huang, would you pick up Duke Johnson, assuming that we learn that David Johnson is not going to be activated off IR, or would you prefer to pick up Frank Gore?
Who does Houston play this week?
Houston, I believe, has Indianapolis.
Indianapolis. That's right.
Now I don't know. Buckner is on the COVID list, or was he injured this week? I know he was out.
I can't remember.
I think he was on the COVID list, so he may be back. I don't know if he tested positive or not. It does make a little bit of a difference to me.
Right.
Although, again, Yates, we touched on this in the podcast. They don't have anybody else, man. And Duke Johnson did show. Look, he caught that touchdown, a nice, play design, a nice pass that they caught. They ran it to him another time too that drew the pass interference penalty that he might have come down with that touchdown as well on Thanksgiving. And then they wound up giving it to CJ Prosise. My big worry is that CJ Prosise suddenly became the goal line back, apparently, with this.
When did that happen?
I don't know when it happened, but that is my little worry. But I do wonder, and I kind of hold out hope that whoever the running back is in Houston might get more involved in the game plan with Will Fuller out. So anyway, just something to keep in mind. But you do have, again, the Jets taking on the Raiders this weekend. So who do you like best?
I'd personally go with Frank Gore there.
Yeah. I think that's fine. My guess is that Frank Gore is going to rank higher for me this week in my rankings, which again, we haven't done that yet, but that's what I'm thinking as well. But I don't have strong feelings on that. They're going to be pretty close. Jonathan DeLoca asked, and I guess we touched on this, do you think Drew Brees is going to come back week 15 as had been originally projected?
So when I said this year, I meant like in 2020, right? Mm-hmm. That maybe the playoffs, that maybe. So as far as him coming back in week 15, I would bet the over there. I would expect week 17 if they're still competing for, wild card spot, whatever. But I do expect him back for the playoffs at least.
Yeah. I mean, it's going to be interesting. The one thing to remember is that if, their offense does start to get figured out a little bit with Taysom Hill, there's only one bye spot, right? There's only one bye this week for a playoff team, I believe. So they're in that right now. The Saints are, I believe, but they've got to keep that spot. So if somehow they need to win and Taysom Hill defenses are starting to figure out, I could maybe see him coming back in week 15. But again, sort of the same way with Joe Mixon, I'm not planning to rely on Drew Brees this year. From Team Mahabir, is George Kittle coming back? I have already made the playoffs and I'm trying to plan ahead.
I got this question earlier too on Reddit, and I just don't see it happening based on the initial reports. I haven't heard anything else since then as far as his recovery or anything, but based on the initial reports, I wasn't expecting to have George Kittle back this year.
Yeah. I don't think so. They are in contention. I could see if they, in contention, I use that term loosely.
Right.
If they do somehow continue to win and they get there, I could see Kittle potentially coming back. But again, I'm not relying on him. Sean Martin asked, should I depart? Ooh, I like the language here. Should I depart with Cam Newton and stream the QB position for the rest of the season? Do you think you're just able to trust Newton as your starter rest of season? I'll give you their schedule here, Yates, coming up. They have the Chargers, the Rams, the Dolphins, and the Bills.
I think Newton himself at this point is in the streaming conversation. So if you want to, you want to play the better matchups and you want to, roll the dice that Newton is not going to find the end zone as a runner, then yeah, I'm fine doing that. Like I would personally probably play Ryan Fitzpatrick over Cam Newton this week.
Yeah, I am totally fine to do that. Newton is definitely not a guy who I feel like I roster him. I'm going to keep him in my starting lineup each and every week. He's out of that space at this point. So I think you're totally fine to stream. All right. That is it for week 12.5's waiver wire live stream. Thank you everybody for still tuning in. We're going to be here every week. We will make sure to listen to our podcast. Yates and I touched on a lot more on today's podcast. I'll drop later. Listen to yesterday's waiver wire podcast, and Yates will be back with your Start Sit live stream later in the week. He will talk to you then.